So is Sweden really safer now after joining NATO? I mean, that's the question on everyone's mind,
Yeah,
right?
it's a big one.
It is. And luckily, we've got some seriously insightful analysis to help us figure this out. Rivyona, a multilingual media network that's always on top of these global issues.
They always have their finger on the pulse, don't they?
They do. They really do.
Yeah.
Especially with everything going on in the world right now. Ukraine, global tensions rising, it feels like.
And Sweden's right in the thick of it, too.
Exactly. Right there in the Baltic region.
Just can't get much more strategic than that.
Nope. So Rivyona digs right into the heart of it. They're asking, has Sweden actually become safer since joining NATO? Like, how exactly?
Well, it's really fascinating how NATO membership completely changes things for Sweden. You've got the collective defense principle, an attack on one NATO member, it's an attack on all of them. And in this current climate...
That's a huge deterrent.
Huge.
Like they suddenly have this giant security blanket.
Yeah.
Right? They're not facing threats alone anymore.
Exactly. But it's not just about stopping like a traditional military invasion.
Right. Things are getting more complicated these days.
Way more complicated.
Look at what happened with those underwater cables in the Baltic Sea.
Oh, yeah.
Damaged.
That whole thing really highlights the changing nature of conflict, what we call hybrid warfare.
Okay, so hybrid warfare. What exactly are we talking about here?
It's like this blend of conventional and unconventional tactics designed to disrupt and destabilize, but without actually going to full-blown war. You know,
I think so.
Cyber attacks,
Okay.
disinformation campaigns,
Got it.
economic pressure. It's a way of waging conflict in the shadows.
So instead of tanks and troops, it's malware and fake news?
Yeah, you could say that.
And that sounds a lot harder to defend against.
It really is.
So even with NATO, how worried should Sweden be about this hybrid warfare stuff?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Mats Knutsen, he's a political commentator from SVT, and he thinks the risk of, like, a straight-up military conflict, it's definitely gone down because of NATO.
Okay, but there's a but coming, isn't there?
Well, even Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson admits Sweden's kind of in this, I don't know, gray zone right now.
Not at war, but not peace either.
Yeah, something like that.
So like a security limbo?
You could put it that way.
And it makes sense when you think about where Sweden is.
Right in the middle of it all.
The Baltic region is.
A total geopolitical hotspot.
Okay, and then you've got Carl-Oskar Bolin, Sweden's Minister for Civil Defense. He's been talking a lot about the possibility of war. Some people are calling him a fearmonger even.
Oh, wow.
I mean, isn't that a little extreme? Especially with what we just heard about NATO and this whole gray zone thing.
It's definitely sparked a debate, but the key here is Boland's argument. He's saying preparedness is absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
And honestly, the war in Ukraine has been a major wake-up call for everyone.
It's like he's saying don't get complacent just because you're in NATO. Be ready for anything.
Exactly. He thinks relying only on traditional defense might not be enough anymore. Not with all these new threats.
Okay, so Sweden's got that big NATO shield now. But they're already quietly getting ready for the shadows, too.
That's right, and that preparedness goes way beyond just what the government does. It means individual citizens being aware, informed, ready to play their part.
So it's a whole mindset shift, everyone realizing security is a constant process.
You got it.
So what does being prepared even look like for Sweden? Especially with all this talk about hybrid warfare.
Right.
It can't just be about, stocking up on supplies and building bunkers.
No, definitely not. It's way more complex than that. Sweden's really focusing on cybersecurity, protecting critical infrastructure like power grids, communication networks, even teaching people how to spot fake news, that kind of thing.
Wow. It's like a whole-of-society defense strategy. But didn't you say earlier that Sweden was traditionally neutral? So it seems like they've been thinking about these security issues for a while.
You're absolutely right. Even though they were neutral, Sweden never completely ignored defense. They've been building a pretty strong system for years.
So they weren't just pretending everything was fine.
Not at all. They invested a lot in technology, intelligence, even training their citizens for different threats. They even have a whole network of underground shelters.
Seriously?
Yeah.
To protect civilians in case of an attack. That's incredible. It sounds like they were already way ahead of the curve when it comes to understanding how conflict is changing.
Absolutely. They realized early on that military power wasn't the only thing that mattered anymore.
Right.
Other countries could definitely learn from their approach.
Okay, so joining NATO sends a strong message. But Sweden was already quietly preparing behind the scenes.
Exactly. And that preparedness isn't just about the government.
It's about the people, too.
It involves individual citizens being aware and informed, ready to do their part.
So it's a collective effort.
You got it.
A whole new way of thinking about security.
That's a great way to put it.
This whole deep dive into Sweden and their security, it's really got me thinking.
Oh, yeah?
We always focus on those big events, the ones that make headlines.
Right.
But there's like this whole other level of threats. just simmering under the surface.
Yeah, and that's what's so important about Sweden's experience. It's like a microcosm of what so many countries are facing, this constantly changing threat landscape, figuring out how to adapt, and realizing that everyone has to play their part.
And it's fascinating how Sweden was already ahead of the game. They were taking these hybrid threats seriously, even before the war in Ukraine, before it was on everyone's radar.
It really makes you wonder how other countries are adapting. What can we learn from Sweden? What are we missing?
It's like we need a whole new playbook to deal with these shadowy tactics.
Exactly. And that playbook can't just be about military responses or what the government does. It has to include everyday people, too. We all have a role to play in keeping our society safe.
So this isn't just about Sweden then. It's about all of us understanding how conflict is changing and thinking about what we can do to build a more secure future. Well, that's it for our deep dive today. Hope you found it insightful and maybe even a little thought-provoking. Until next time, stay curious.